I'd like to welcome you all to California District 39's Tri-County Community Town Hall. This event is brought to you by Indivisible, California District 39, and the Courage Campaign. You'll hear more about us in just a bit. My name is Debra Brunner, and I am the chair of the Actions Committee for Indivisible 39. All right, I would now like to invite Mahdi and Manji from Courage Campaign to tell you about their group.
Hello everyone, thank you. My name is Mahdi. I'm with the Courage Campaign. And the Courage Campaign fights for a more progressive California and a more progressive United States.
I would now like to invite Anna Gonzales from Planned Parenthood to the mic. Anna.
Hi everybody, my name is Anna Gonzales. I am with Planned Parenthood of Orange and San Bernardino counties. Very happy to be here.
Please join me in welcoming Jonathan Mansoori.
I want to invite on stage Congressman Ed Royce, Congresswoman Sánchez, and State Assemblywoman Sharon Quirk-Silva. So much for joining us this evening and dedicating your time.
So, can you hear me back? Can you hear me back? Raise your hand. Okay, excellent. Good evening, everybody. I am Congresswoman Sánchez. I represent the 38th Congressional District. It is not far from here. It's the cities that sort of border on the Orange County line. I represent about 15 cities. Live in the city of Whittier and have been serving in the United States Congress since 2003. In Congress, I serve on the Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over trade with other countries, taxes, and the social safety net programs like Medicare and Social Security. I also this year am serving in the Democratic leadership as the vice chair of the Democratic Caucus, and I'm really excited to see so many of you here that are interested in getting information and learning how to be engaged in civics. So thank you for inviting me to participate. I look forward to a really productive discussion.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to see all of you here, and very exciting because this place tells a lot about why I became engaged in politics. I grew up here in the city of Fullerton, attended all public schools, and have taught in public schools for over 30 years right here, very close by. I served on the Fullerton City Council for 2 terms and 2 terms as mayor, and one of the things I'm really proud about here is this, in fact, community center was built while I was on council, and it was a joint project with the Senior Center, Boys and Girls Club, so please look at that, but that was a project that took almost my entire 8 years on council to bring forward. So that's an example of what you can do at the local level when you work closely and when you really value the community and you want to serve them. I also have served in the State Assembly in 2012. Then returned after not being elected in 2014, and I went right back to teaching 3 weeks later with a whole classroom, 5 periods of junior high, mostly boys who were needing a little push, and they in fact pushed me to decide to run again. And so I was reelected in 2016, and I'm very proud to be the State Assembly member that represents North Orange County.
I jumped back here, huh? So let's actually get started. Turn on the mic a little bit. So just a reframe of the questions again. It's going to be 30 seconds for your question. I will cut you off. We will then allow the directed question to be answered. Okay, so we're going to start. We're going to have 2 folks up to bat. The first 2 with the hands up. I see 1, I see 2.
Is this thing on? All right, if you agree, that was your chance for agree. All right, it's on. All right, so I'm Phil Janowicz. I'm a long-time resident here in 8065 CD39. One question I know I definitely want to ask here is about what we can do for our LGBTQ people in the community. We've seen some vicious attacks coming at the federal level in the past week, and we thankfully have fought for marriage equality. We can't give up yet. That could be taken away, so we got to keep fighting. But what can we do at both the federal level and the state level to make sure that discrimination laws for work are taken off the books there? So that's my question.
Okay, I'll take a crack at that. So we have seen some really disappointing actions on behalf of the administration towards the LGBTQ community. The majority of rights advancement for LGBTQ has come through the courts. So there is always the ability to challenge some of those orders or directives legally, but we all know legal challenges take a long time to win their way through the process, and they can be appealed, etc. One of the things that I think is going to be a recurring theme throughout tonight is I cannot express strongly enough how much public sentiment can change attitudes and policies, even at the federal level. So being engaged, being vocal about issues that matter to you, banding with other people who are like-minded to push for action that is inclusive and against policies that discriminate. As hokey as it may seem, contacting your elected representatives and letting them know via email or, letter writing's kind of old-fashioned now, but people still do it. Phone calls, letting them know that, where you stand on positions like that, and letting your elected representatives know that you're watching how they're voting or how they're reacting to some of these policies. And, I tell people, we make progress, and sometimes you have to take one step back to move 2 steps forward. But I tell people, every community in this country is a part of the American fabric. We all contribute to what makes this country great. Don't let people single out groups and make them scapegoats for issues. Stand up and be proud of being a member of a group. Talk about what that group contributes to this country, whether it's through work, charities, volunteering in your community. When you tell those personal stories, people put a personal face to those communities rather than just lumping them into one group that they can then demonize. So your most powerful weapon is your engagement, whether that's voting, urging others to vote, spreading the word on social media about issues that you care about, and your opinions.
And I will try not to repeat, but I agree with everything that the Congress member just said. But I also will always go back to my roots as an educator, because I really think many of the issues that we have, of course, we do have legislation, whether it be federal, state, local, even county, but it's also with it neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend, family member to family member, that these are critical conversations. And they really start many times or should start as kids are growing up or children are growing up. And so I'm not saying that, these are conversations we should knock on a neighbor's door to have, but there are instances that we have faced where you're involved with something and somebody might make a remark, and I think those are the opportunities to engage in that. And if it is something that really is belittling another group, that you really stand up. And I can think of times when my kids were growing up where you really have to call somebody out, and that doesn't mean a battle or a fight, but just say, that really was offensive, or I'm really surprised that you would say that. And I remember way back, it was actually the riots down in LA, and right here in Fullerton, we were outside, my kids were all babies at that time, and there was a really offensive remark made about some of the people were rioting, calling them apes and animals. And that was the very first time. These were all people that were friends, and it was the very first time. And I did say that. I said, you know, I'm really surprised that you would call somebody like that. And it did have a kind of quiet moment, but you do have to, I think those are the small steps that you can make along with the larger voicing and working together.
Thank you, everyone, for the respectful way that you were showing your green cards.
Good evening. I'm Gil Cisneros, and I am running for Congress here in 30 minutes. Thank you. I've known the Congresswoman for a little while, and she knows that education is a very passionate subject of mine that I am deeply concerned about. And yet, this administration, Trump, and Secretary of Education Betty DeVos, who's completely unqualified, are continually trying to steal funds away from our educational system, take money away from our local schools so that they can use vouchers at these private schools. They're cutting Pell Grants, and they're really not looking for the people that need to go to education, because for me and for many people here, it's a game changer. And we need to promote education as much as we can. So what are we doing at the federal and at the state level to protect these funds for education? What are we doing to make college more affordable, both at the federal and the state level? What are we doing to transform our college loan process so we can really start making investments in students, which is really an investment in our future for America?
So I can tell you that at the federal level, these battles have been raging for many, many years. We are constantly fighting to preserve educational funding and that investment in America's future citizens and future workforce. We just actually passed legislation reinstituting summer Pell, which for many students is a game changer. But there's always constantly threats to slash funding to education, and I can't think of a worse thing to do than to stop investing in the future of tomorrow. Right now we are fighting budget cuts to every agency, a massive proportion. I'm not talking 1 or 2% here. We're talking like 35% cuts to certain agencies, including some very deep, very painful educational cuts. And it concerns me, and we fight with every tactic that we can to try to slow down or stop some of the worst of these proposals. They have not passed a budget yet in Congress, but if you have not seen the president's budget, it's pretty astonishing how deep the cuts are and how much they're going to hurt the future of this country. So, we use every tool available to us at the federal level to try to block that. But one thing that I want to make sure that people understand is that right now, one party controls the Senate, the House, and the White House. So all three are controlled by one party. And when you have the numbers, because you have the majority to control, you get to decide what bills come to the floor for a vote. You get to decide what topics we have hearings on in Congress. You get to decide what bills get marked up, which means basically which bills do you move along the process to an ultimate vote on the floor. And if you don't control, you don't get to do that. So many of our best proposals to try to make college more affordable, to make college low cost, we can't get them moving because we do not control the agenda. And we have to keep pushing back on that because, again, public sentiment can turn the tide on any issue. And, I'm just as passionate about education as you are. I used to teach 3rd grade. I know how critical it is to make those investments in early learning, K through 12, and then, college as well. But we are really besieged with, the proposed budget that the president wants, and we need people to raise their voices up and say, this is not acceptable. These are not the priorities of a great democracy like the United States of America. And the more that people are engaged in holding their public officials accountable, the less chance that they're going to be able to actually implement those very deep, very harmful cuts.
And on education, one of the things you'll hear the theme is what the federal government does obviously impacts all of us, but as well as the state and local and county. So on the state, I serve on the higher education committee, and we do talk about not only college affordability, but we have moved forward legislation that's focusing on reducing college debt. There's been a huge investment this last budget cycle. One of the areas that I've been focusing on is kind of what is old is new. So here I am with my little old binder. But the point is that we know that particularly in California, we have wonderful community colleges. We have our Cal State system. But one of the issues we continue to have is the access. Can we get students graduated within 4 years? How long is the average student graduating? And once they get there, are they successful? So those are areas that we continue to work on, but again, it's the investment, and as you'll hear with the narrative, what happens at the federal level affects the state level. So everything that the federal level does affects us. So if there is a refocus of public dollars, whether it be into vouchers, whether it be into charter schools, any of that public focus, all of that will change the public education as we see it. Now, I'm the first to say as an educator, we do need changes. We always need to evolve. We always need to have opportunities for parents because they're going to look for the very best place for their own children to go to school. But public school is the only choice for many, many. How many of you went to public school? There you go. And not all of us can take, a car trip to the special art school in another city away. So one of our primary goals has to be to build our public schools as best as they can be in our neighborhood schools, because most of our families are going to be going to those schools. So it's always about investing in education.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Lucent Stoffel, and I'm a resident here in Fullerton for about 18 years. We've all worked very hard, a lot of us have worked very hard the last few months and very diligently to try to resist the policies that the Trump administration and the GOP has been trying to impose in repealing and replacing Obamacare, and we've had some success. But now I see a new threat where Trump and the GOP is trying to defund Obamacare and destabilize the markets. And my question is, what can we do to fight and resist this new threat of defunding Obamacare so that companies like Anthem, which announced yesterday that they're going to leave Southern California, for the individual plans, how do we prevent ACA from being sabotaged by the GOP?
That is a great question, and I will just say that for the past 6 months, we have been in a locked battle to try to preserve the Affordable Care Act. For the majority of Americans, it has proven to be wildly successful. There is a small group of people who have seen carriers leave the market. They maybe only have one plan offered, and premiums have gone up. But that's about 6% of all the people covered by the Affordable Care Act. So the vast majority of people have seen the quality of their health care improve, certainly the access to health care improve, and the affordability. In the House, we managed to defeat the bill the first time, but we call it the zombie bill because it rose from the dead. They resuscitated it, and they were able to pass with just enough votes past the House version. We have seen the Senate locked in a battle the last several weeks, which culminated last week in a surprise defeat of their attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And that took groups and individuals and doctors and hospitals and nurses getting out there and agitating and demanding that they not tear down something which has proven to be so beneficial for so many Americans. And that has, again, is probably example number one of how public sentiment can change the tide, because remember, the Republicans have a majority in the Senate. If all of the Republicans would have voted for that bill, they could have passed it and they could have repealed the ACA. But senators heard from their constituents and individuals and people who would be affected by the repeal, people with pre-existing conditions, people who never had health care coverage before, people who had employer-based health care but that didn't have very good coverage or many consumer protections. And it was that huge effort on the part of many individuals, but in the collective sense, that made that happen, that reversed that. And that's why I say every individual in a democracy has the power to effectuate change. Each one of you seated here tonight can make change happen. But it takes persistence, and it takes not taking no for an answer, and holding your elected representatives accountable. Now the new threat, well, they defeated the bill in the Senate for now. I say for now because, like a zombie, they can bring it back from the dead again to attempt, at another time. We have to remain vigilant. All of us here have to remain vigilant to make sure that they don't try to take another stab at killing Obamacare, for lack of a better analogy, sorry. But the new thing is there is a threat. Since the ACAs came into being, once the Republicans took control of Congress, they have tried everything to try to make sure that it fails. They've tried to sabotage it in many ways. Many of the provisions of the law they challenged, and some of the challenges were successful. The Medicare expansion, the courts ruled that states didn't have to embrace the Medicare expansion, and so states like Texas didn't. And then, by the way, you'll notice in states like Texas, the coverage is much lower than in other parts of the country. Republican governors of states that took the expansion have seen how coverage has expanded and how healthcare has improved for their constituents. Some Republican governors called their Republican senators and said, please don't vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act. It's working, it's helping constituents in your state. We have to remain just as vigilant for the sabotage that they are threatening to do now with the ACA by defunding it or not having the IRS enforce the penalties for those who don't purchase health insurance. And you can choose not to, but you have to pay a penalty to the IRS. Well, since they are the ones in charge of the IRS now, they can tell the IRS, just don't collect the fines. And so they can cause major disruptions, and they can cause coverage to fail in many areas simply through starting the program. So again, everybody here has to remain vigilant and push back against those attempts to purposely try to sabotage the Affordable Care Act.
But can they actually defund it? Is it in the legal?
I will tell you that some of those actions have already started, as Congresswoman was saying, with starting the program. So an example, here in California, we have Cover California. And in order to get people to enroll and to get them to know more about the program, go to the exchange, there was a lot of promotional dollars spent for that. Not only timelines when you need to enroll by, all of this information being pushed out through social media, commercials, radio, and that was where the success started to happen. So originally, if you remember, some of the numbers were pretty weak. Matter of fact, in 2012, when I was elected to the state assembly, the ACA had just been awarded, and people were just getting used to it. So we held several town halls like this explaining the coverage, and they were very contentious. At that point, people were very fearful. It isn't a perfect program. There could be improvements. But we actually, one of our jobs as the state assembly was to make sure we could encourage people to enroll, let them know what the plans were, and that became very successful. Actually, one of our field reps, and I know he knows what I'm going to say, he's way back there, but he worked for me in 2012, and his name's Kelvin, but he really was the face of our office, and so we ended up calling him Covered Cal. But, so, 4 short years later, now we're talking about the unrolling of it. And so I've heard things as scary as the federal government not putting any money into the promotion of it, so that if people don't know, okay, it's time to re-enroll, then they're just off the program. So these type of things. So again, this is where collectively you can even tell your individual family members, you can send some type of Facebook message, stay on the program, look into it, because what's better for somebody to say a program doesn't work if people stop enrolling because they're confused, or, they don't get a notice, all of these type of things. So I think it's really imperative that individually you keep up to date. But we even heard at the federal government on the healthcare pages, they've taken a lot of pages down. Pages that are making links harder to get to. And how many of you have been navigating something, you've got to go through 5 links and then you're like, forget it. So the point is, one of you or a handful of you start to be your own navigators in order to teach others how to be navigators, so that this becomes something that pretty soon, again, you have a movement where, okay, you're not going to pay for the press or the PR on it, but we're going to find it ourselves and help others.